Silence isn't absence, it's a message. We live in a world where we often measure connection by how much someone talks to us, texts us, checks in, or validates us. So when someone goes quiet, especially someone we care about deeply, our first instinct is to panic. We assume we've lost them. We assume something is wrong with us. We assume absence. But what we often fail to realize is that silence itself is a form of communication. It may not be the form we want, but it's a form nonetheless. Think about it. When someone truly wants to keep you in their life, they will find a way to stay present no matter how difficult the situation is. They will fight for clarity, for connection, for resolution. So when someone withdraws into silence, it doesn't mean there's nothing to be said. It usually means there's too much to be said, and they're choosing not to say it. That choice is the message. Silence doesn't always come from a bad place. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's emotional immaturity. Sometimes it's avoidance. But no matter where it comes from, it always tells you something valuable. How someone handles discomfort, how they deal with confrontation, how willing they are to lean in when things get hard, and more importantly, how much they respect you, your time, and your need for clarity. The hardest thing to do is to not fill in the blanks, to not chase, to not beg for answers or start rewriting your worth just because someone else went quiet. But when you do that, when you resist the urge to make excuses for someone else's lack of effort, you begin to hear the truth beneath the silence. You start to understand that people who care don't leave you wondering. They don't leave you trying to decipher mixed signals. They don't leave you in emotional limbo. So the next time someone goes quiet on you, ask yourself, what is this silence actually saying? Is it saying, I'm overwhelmed, but I'll return when I can? Or is it saying, I don't value this enough to communicate? Is it a pause or is it a period? Because your emotional energy is too valuable to waste on someone who refuses to speak when it matters most. And here's the truth that most people don't want to admit. Silence is a decision. It's a decision not to confront, not to explain, not to show up. And if someone's silence leaves you anxious, unsettled, or doubting yourself, you need to recognize that this is not a space you should fight to stay in. You shouldn't have to argue with someone's silence. You shouldn't have to convince someone to communicate, to be present, to reassure you. You can wait for something better. Silence should not be the space. You should be present to reassure you. You deserve someone who chooses dialogue over distance, someone who understands that even hard conversations are better than no conversation at all. Someone who doesn't rely on disappearing to deal with conflict, because the real measure of connection isn't how someone behaves when things are easy, it's how they show up when it's not. We all crave answers. We all want closure, but sometimes silence is the answer. It tells you everything you need to know about someone's capacity to show up in a relationship. It shows you whether they're emotionally available or just temporarily convenient. It shows you whether they're mature enough to handle the weight of real connection or just passing through for the parts that feel good. You have to trust that the person who values you will never make you feel like you're hard to reach. They will not go quiet when you need clarity. They will not disappear when communication matters most, because when someone truly sees your worth, they speak clearly, consistently, and with care. When someone you care about goes quiet, it's easy to assume they've made a decision. Maybe they've lost interest. Maybe they've stopped caring, but more often than not, That silence isn't the result of a clean, confident choice. It's a reflection of internal confusion, emotional conflict, or a desire to avoid discomfort. A lot of people haven't learned how to sit with hard emotions. They haven't been taught to articulate what they feel, especially when it's messy, unclear, or contradictory. So instead of talking through it, instead of admitting they don't know how to say what's going on, they choose to go silent. It feels easier. It delays the confrontation. It pushes the pressure onto you, hoping maybe you'll make the move, you'll ask, you'll guess, you'll fix. But silence doesn't mean peace. It often means paralysis. It means they're stuck, caught between what they want and what they fear, between what they know and what they can't yet accept. Maybe they care about you, but they also fear. Maybe they want to connect, but they're terrified of not being enough. Maybe they feel guilty for not showing up the way you deserve. And silence becomes their escape from having to face that truth. When someone is confused internally, their external communication reflects that. You get mixed signals, inconsistent energy. One day they're all in, the next they disappear. You're left wondering if you did something wrong, if they've changed their mind, or if you imagined the whole connection. That confusion you feel isn't just in your head. It's a reaction to the chaos they're carrying but refusing to confront out loud. Then there's conflict. Silence can often be a symptom of something unresolved. It might not even be about you. It could be internal wounds they haven't healed or fears they haven't processed. Maybe they've experienced betrayal before, and now that things feel real, it triggers their defenses. Instead of working through the discomfort, they pull back, not because they don't care, but because conflict makes them shut down. Sometimes silence is a punishment, not one meant to harm, but one meant to protect themselves. They think if I say the wrong thing, I'll ruin it, or if I open up, I might get rejected, so they choose distance instead. They hope silence will buy them time or clarity, or at the very least, a delay from making a choice they feel unprepared to make. And then there's avoidance. This is the most painful form of silence, because it's not always born from confusion. It's born from discomfort. They don't want to have a tough conversation. They don't want to hurt you. They don't want to take responsibility for how they feel or how they've made you feel. So they choose to ghost, drift, disconnect. Avoidance gives them the illusion of control. It lets them walk away without confrontation, without guilt, without being held accountable. But avoidance doesn't remove responsibility. It just transfers the weight onto you. Suddenly, you're the one left wondering what happened. You're the one analyzing texts, revisiting moments, trying to decode what their silence could possibly mean. That mental exhaustion, it's the emotional toll of someone else's unwillingness to face the hard parts of being human, of loving, of being honest. The hard truth is that people often go quiet when they're not emotionally equipped to deal with what's required of them, when they don't have the tools to speak their mind or heart with clarity, when their coping mechanism is escape instead of engagement. And it's not always malicious, it's often unconscious. Learned behavior, past wounds, emotional immaturity. But no matter the reason, the silence still says something. It says, I'm not ready to deal with this, or I don't know how to say what I feel, or I hope this all goes away on its own. It says there's something unresolved inside them, and instead of unpacking it with you, they've chosen to keep it locked away. Sometimes the loudest part of a relationship isn't in the conversations, it's in the silences. It's in the long pauses between responses, the texts left unread, the plans that never quite get made. It's in the moments where something should have been said and wasn't, the things you needed to hear but never did. That absence of words, that's a message in itself. We're taught to listen to words, to wait for someone to say what they feel. But a person's silence often reveals more than their speech. Because when someone cares, you feel it without them having to say it. You don't have to beg for reassurance or constantly ask where you stand. They show up, they reach out, they check in. And when someone doesn't, when they leave you in the dark, avoid the hard questions, or disappear when vulnerability is needed, it's not just forgetfulness or being busy. It's a form of communication. It's telling you something they either don't know how to say or don't want to say out loud. Some people are afraid of confrontation. They'd rather stay quiet than tell you they're pulling away. Some are unsure of their feelings, and instead of admitting that uncertainty, they withdraw and let you feel the confusion. They think they're sparing your feelings by not being direct, when in reality, they're creating more damage by staying silent. People often assume that if they don't say something, they're not responsible for how it affects you. But that's not true. The things people leave unsaid, those gaps in honesty, the missing explanations, the absence of closure, they leave you carrying the weight. You're left trying to fill in the blanks, making sense of behavior that never comes with clarity. And that's exhausting. Think about how someone treats you when there's tension. Do they communicate? Do they lean in? Or do they disappear and hope time will erase what words should have addressed? When someone consistently avoids the important conversations, when they don't express appreciation, when they never acknowledge hurt they caused, that silence speaks volumes about their emotional availability. It's not just about what they don't say. It's about what they're unwilling to face. The person who stops saying, "I love you" without explaining why is saying something. The person who pulls away emotionally but pretends everything is fine is saying something. The person who leaves questions hanging, never follows through, never asks how you're really doing, those are not just oversights, they're patterns. They reveal comfort zones, fears, priorities. They tell you where you rank in their life, even if they never say it directly. What people don't say often forces you to become the interpreter of their emotions, which isn't fair. You shouldn't have to decode someone else's behavior to feel secure. You shouldn't have to guess whether someone respects or values you. If it's not being said, if it's not being shown, that's already an answer. When you start paying attention to the silences, the skipped apologies, the delayed messages, the lack of interest in your world, you stop clinging to words that were once said but are no longer backed by action. You realize that people may not say, "I'm no longer invested," but you can feel it in the way they stop showing up. You realize that "I don't want this" doesn't always come as a sentence. It comes as distance, disinterest, emotional detachment, not speaking up, not communicating, not engaging. That's not neutral. That's not harmless. That's not passive. It's a form of emotional expression. And often it's louder than anything someone could have put into words, because silence doesn't leave room for clarity. It leaves room for doubt. And that doubt becomes the foundation for mistrust, insecurity, and imbalance. You start to learn the difference between someone who is just quiet and someone who is deliberately avoiding truth. Between someone who is gentle with their words and someone who is withholding. Between someone who doesn't talk much and someone who is silently creating distance so they don't have to take responsibility. And that distinction is everything, because not everything unspoken is harmless. Silence can feel powerful. It can seem poetic, even profound. In movies and novels, a long pause or a quiet departure is often portrayed as meaningful, mysterious, or emotionally deep. We're conditioned to believe that when someone withdraws into silence, it must be because they're feeling something too big for words, something noble, something heavy, something worth waiting for. But in real life, silence is rarely that romantic. More often, it's confusing, hurtful, and full of unanswered questions. And interpreting it through the lens of fantasy rather than reality can be one of the most painful mistakes we make in relationship. There's a tendency to project emotions onto someone's silence that they may not actually be feeling. You think he's quiet because he's scared to lose me, or she's distant because she's overwhelmed by how much she cares. And maybe, in some cases, that's true. But more often, silence is not depth, it's avoidance. It's emotional hesitation, fear of responsibility, or simply a lack of effort. And if you're not careful, you'll romanticize a form of neglect as a sign of hidden affection. It's tempting to believe the silence is meaningful because that gives you hope. Hope that it's not over. Hope that they'll come back. Hope that the lack of words doesn't mean a lack of care. But when you fill in someone else's silence with your own narrative, you start creating a version of the relationship that only exists in your imagination. You stop seeing what is and start holding on to what you want it to be. Silence can feel intimate, especially when you've shared deep moments with someone before. So when the silence comes, it's easy to misinterpret it as a continuation of that connection, like there's still a bond that words can't break. But silence is not always sacred. Sometimes it's just silence. Sometimes it's just avoidance dressed up as mystery. And if you keep treating it as something beautiful, you risk ignoring the very real lack of communication and emotional presence that's playing out in front of you. You have to be honest about what silence is costing you. Are you spending your energy trying to decode someone who doesn't want to be understood? Are you lowering your expectations, shrinking your needs, hoping that your patience will somehow inspire them to speak? Are you holding on to someone who left just because they didn't say it out loud? Because silence isn't always a cliffhanger. It's often the final chapter. Not every story ends with words. Sometimes the exit is quiet. No closure, no explanation. And when that happens, it hurts. But it also tells you something vital. Someone who doesn't value your need for communication is not someone who can build a real partnership. You shouldn't have to chase clarity. You shouldn't have to guess if you're still valued. You shouldn't have to pretend that someone's silence is some grand emotional gesture when it's actually emotional absence. Interpreting silence wisely means asking hard questions. Is this person quiet because they're processing or because they've disengaged? Are they giving space because they care or because they've lost interest and don't want to say it? Are you holding on to their silence because it makes you feel close to them or because you're afraid of what their words might actually confirm? These are questions that require brutal honesty. Not fantasy, not wishful thinking, because the truth is, silence is neutral until you assign meaning to it. And when you assign the wrong meaning, you stay stuck in a cycle of waiting, wondering, hoping. And the more you romanticize it, the harder it becomes to walk away. Silence becomes the hook that keeps you attached, even when the connection is long gone. There's a quiet kind of exhaustion that comes from being the one who always reaches out first. The one who sends the good morning texts. The one who plans the good morning texts. the one who plans, reminds, follows up. At first, it feels okay. You tell yourself you're just being thoughtful, that maybe they're busy, maybe they're just not great at expressing themselves. You give them grace and you keep giving. But over time, you start to notice the pattern. You initiate, they respond. You invest, they receive. You care, they allow it. And slowly you begin to feel the weight of a connection that you're carrying mostly on your own. Relationships aren't about keeping score, but they are about mutual effort. When you're the only one initiating, it becomes less about connection and more about pursuit. You start to question whether they're truly invested or simply accustomed to being pursued, whether they enjoy your presence or just don't mind it, whether they would ever reach out if you stopped showing up first. That doubt becomes a quiet companion in your day-to-day interactions. You begin to feel like a guest in someone else's life instead of a priority in it. One-sided initiation chips away at your self-worth. It sends a subtle message that your needs come second, that your presence in someone's life isn't important enough to inspire action on their end. And while it might not be intentional, it still creates imbalance. You begin to shrink yourself emotionally, measuring your texts, your calls, your energy, because you don't want to come off as too much. You overthink your natural instincts to connect, because the response on the other side is always lukewarm, delayed, or inconsistent. There's a difference between someone who's simply not great at communication and someone who doesn't value the effort you're putting in. The former is willing to meet you halfway once you talk about it. The latter will continue letting you do all the emotional labor because it benefits them. It keeps the dynamic easy, unchallenged. They don't have to risk vulnerability. They don't have to invest. They just have to respond enough to keep you hanging on. Initiation is a reflection of interest, not always in grand gestures, but in small, everyday ways. If someone wants you in their life, you won't constantly have to remind them of your existence. They'll make space for you. They'll check in without being asked. They'll remember what matters to you, not because you demanded it, but because they care enough to pay attention. Effort doesn't require reminders when someone is emotionally invested. Being the only one to initiate also sets a precedent. It teaches the other person that they don't need to try, that you'll always come to them. And that dynamic slowly creates resentment. Not because you're keeping score, but because you're human. Everyone wants to feel chosen. Everyone wants to feel wanted without having to beg for attention or initiate every single moment of connection. There's a moment in every one-sided connection where silence stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling loud. It begins as a space, an unanswered message, a delay in response, a shift in tone. But as time goes on, that silence begins to carry weight. It stretches, it lingers, and eventually it demands an answer, not from them, but from you. Because when someone stops choosing you through their actions, their silence becomes an invitation for you to finally choose yourself. When someone goes quiet, it leaves you alone with your thoughts. At first, that loneliness feels unbearable. You search for reasons, excuses, loopholes. You wonder what changed. You wonder if you did something wrong. You replay your words, your tone, your timing. You try to fix something you didn't even break, just to restore a sense of control. Because if you can understand the silence, maybe you won't feel so rejected by it. But the truth is, not all silences are meant to be solved. Some are meant to wake you up. to show you where your energy is going and how little of it is coming back, to highlight the imbalance you've been tolerating in the name of hope. Silence strips away the illusions. It forces you to stop listening to what you want to hear and start noticing what's actually happening. And in that noticing, there's power. Because silence doesn't just create distance, it creates clarity. It shows you who checks in when you go quiet too. It shows you who notices your absence without being prompted. It shows you who values you enough to reach back. And more often than not, silence reveals that you were the one filling all the space, holding all the weight, trying to maintain something that wasn't mutual. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop waiting for someone to come back and stop coming back to yourself. When you stop reaching out just to feel seen. When you stop overcompensating for someone else's emotional absence. That peace isn't loud, and it doesn't come overnight. It comes slowly, in small choices, in realizing that you don't need to explain why you feel hurt when someone disappears without care, in deciding that your energy isn't free and your heart isn't disposable, in remembering that your value doesn't depend on how someone else fails or chooses not to show up. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you never did. It just means that you're done trying to prove your worth to someone who stays silent when you need clarity. It means that the silence they gave you becomes the space you now use to heal, to grow, to remember what it feels like to be whole without someone else's half effort. You start to take back the energy you spent waiting. You begin to invest it into places that feel safe, into people who don't leave you guessing, into habits that build you instead of drain you. Silence may feel like rejection, but it's often redirection. It's the world pulling you away from someone who wasn't choosing you so you can finally start choosing yourself without guilt. It's life clearing the noise so you can hear your own voice again. The one that says, I deserve more than crumbs. The one that says, I don't need to chase love to be worthy of it. The one that whispers truths you've ignored in the hope that things would change if you just held on a little longer. And when you choose yourself in the face of silence, you take back the narrative. You stop waiting for closure from someone who couldn't give you communication. You stop trying to understand someone who won't offer understanding in return. You stop tying your sense of peace to someone else's presence. You let their silence be what it is, a reflection of them, and not a measure of you. There's a painful truth most people resist when they're emotionally attached to someone. If he cared enough, you wouldn't be left wondering. You wouldn't need to decode mixed signals or replay conversations, searching for hidden meanings in his words or lack of them. You wouldn't need to ask your friends to help interpret his tone, his pauses, his last message. If someone truly values you, you feel it consistently, clearly, and without confusion. It's easy to fall into the trap of justifying someone else's emotional inconsistency. You tell yourself he's busy, overwhelmed, guarded, or bad at expressing feelings. You tell yourself he's busy, overwhelmed, guarded, or bad at expressing feelings. You tell yourself he's busy, overwhelmed, guarded, or bad at expressing feelings. You tell yourself he's busy, overwhelmed, guarded, or bad at expressing feelings. You tell yourself he's busy, overwhelmed, guarded, or bad at expressing feelings. You tell yourself he's busy, overwhelmed, guarded, or you want to believe the best because caring about